"Get your hands off that chair. That chair is for board members." He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. Loud enough that the two assistants near the door stopped what they were doing. Loud enough that Beverley Okonkwo-Mills looked up from the folder in her hands, met his eyes, and said nothing. She sat down anyway. If you've ever walked into a room and had someone look straight through you, not at you, through you, like you were glass, like you were furniture, like you were one of the potted plants in the corner, then you already know exactly how this story begins. And if you've never had that happen to you, pay close attention. Because what happened in that boardroom at Halloran and Vesper Capital in downtown Calgary on a Tuesday morning in March is the kind of thing that doesn't stay in the room. It follows people home. It ends careers, the way so many disasters start. With one man's absolute start, that he already knew everything he needed to know about a woman he had never met before in his life. His name was Douglas Farquhar in his life. 54 years old. 21 years with Halloran and Vesper, the last 6 as managing director of their Western Canada portfolio. He had a handshake people described as firm and meaningful, which tells you something about the kind of man he was. He wore cufflinks to every meeting, even internal ones. He had a framed photo of himself shaking hands with a former provincial premier on the wall of his office, and he made sure it was visible from the guest chairs. Douglas Farquhar was, in his own estimation, a man who had earned his place. He was also, in the estimation of everyone who would later review the security footage from that morning, a man who had made the single most expensive mistake of his professional life before 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. Now, before we get into what happened next, if you're new here, welcome to Heirloom Tales. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because this story is going to take some turns. If you're already part of this community, you know we don't do short versions. We sit with stories. We let them breathe. Because the details matter. The details are where the truth lives. Let's go back to the beginning. Beverley Okonkwo-Mills was 51 years old, and she had spent the better part of 3 decades building something. Not in the flashy, press release kind of way. Not with venture capital galas and keynote speeches and profiles in glossy magazines. She had built quietly, methodically, the way you build a house in a place with hard winters, with attention to the foundation, with respect for what's underneath, with the understanding that what holds everything up is rarely what people see. She had grown up in Brampton, the second of 4 children, daughter of a nurse and an electrician. Her mother worked nights when the kids were young. Her father drove 40 minutes each way to job sites that didn't always welcome him. Beverley watched both of them come home tired and still show up the next morning, and she understood before she had language for it that showing up was its own form of power. She had studied economics at McMaster, then gone to work for a mid-sized investment firm in Toronto that no longer existed. She had learned fast. She had moved laterally twice and upward 4 times before she was 35. She had made her first significant acquisition at 38. A struggling logistics company in Mississauga that she restructured over 18 months and sold 3 years later at a margin that made people sit up straighter when her name came into a conversation. By the time she was 45, Beverley was not rich in the way that word gets used carelessly. She was rich in the way that meant her money had money. She had majority stakes in 2 mid-market firms, a minority position in a regional bank, and a private holding company, Okonkwo Capital, that managed a portfolio her accountant described, with quiet professional admiration, as genuinely remarkable. She did not dress to signal any of this. She had never seen the point. Her mother had told her once, when she was 17 and angry, about something she couldn't quite articulate. The way people looked at her at the mall, the way teachers at school seemed to grade her work with a kind of reluctant surprise. Her mother had sat across the kitchen table and said, "Baby, the ones worth impressing don't need the performance. And the ones who need the performance will never be impressed enough." Beverley had written it in a notebook. She still had that notebook. So on the Tuesday morning in March, when she flew into Calgary from Toronto, economy, middle seat, because she genuinely did not care and had 3 reports to finish. She arrived at Halloran and Vesper Capital wearing dark slacks, a cream blouse, a gray wool coat she'd had for 11 years, and flat shoes. Her hair was natural, pinned up with a clip she'd bought at a pharmacy in Pearson Airport. She had a canvas tote bag with the logo of a public library on the side. She took the elevator to the 14th floor, where the Alderton room was. The receptionist pointed without looking up from her screen. Beverley found the room. She opened the door. There were 8 people already seated. Junior analysts, 1 senior associate, an assistant taking notes. The main principals hadn't arrived yet. She picked a chair near the head of the table. Not the head itself, just adjacent, set down her tote bag, and opened the folder she'd been carrying. That was when Douglas Farquhar walked in. He was with 2 colleagues, mid-conversation, laughing at something. He stopped when he saw her. Not a subtle stop. A full stop. The kind that makes everyone else in the room feel it. He looked at her the way a man looks at something in a place where it doesn't belong. Not with anger, not yet. With that particular species of confusion that comes from certainty. He was certain he knew everyone who should be in this room. He was certain he recognized everyone of consequence. He did not recognize Beverley Okonkwo-Mills. Therefore, and this was the logic, this was the whole architecture of what followed, she did not belong here. "Can I help you?" he said. She looked up from her folder. "No, I'm fine, thank you." A pause. He came further into the room. His 2 colleagues hung back, slightly. Something in their posture already different from his. "This is a private meeting," Douglas said. "The administrative staff have a separate briefing room on 12. I think that's probably where you want to be." The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people focusing. The bad quiet, the held breath quiet. Beverley looked at him. She had a particular stillness when she was deciding something. People who had worked with hers for years would have recognized it. Douglas Farquhar did not recognize it. "I'm aware of what this meeting is," she said. "Thank you." She turned back to her folder. You could hear the climate control system running. Douglas set his briefcase down on the table, firmly, the way men set things down when they're re-establishing something, and walked toward her. Not aggressive, calibrated, the walk of a man who has managed people for 20 years and knows how to make a point without raising his voice. "I don't know who let you up here," he said quietly, almost reasonably. "But I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside while I get this sorted out. Someone from the front desk can help you find where you need to be." Beverley closed her folder. She looked at him with an expression that several people in that room would later describe independently of each other, in the same way. Calm. Completely calm. Not the calm of someone suppressing something. The calm of someone who has already done all the math and knows exactly what the answer is. "My name is Beverley Okonkwo-Mills," she said. "I'm the managing partner of Okonkwo Capital. We hold a 34% stake in the Alderton Fund, which makes us the majority external investor in this review. I'm here for the quarterly assessment. I was confirmed for this meeting by your CFO 3 weeks ago." She said it the way you state a fact. The way you tell someone what day of the week it is. And now here's the part of the story where a reasonable person, a person paying attention, a person whose ego had not completely colonized the part of the brain responsible for processing new information, would have stopped, would have recalibrated, would have said, "My apologies, Miss Okonkwo-Mills. Welcome, please let me get you some water. Can I take your coat?" Douglas Farquhar was not that person. What he felt in that moment, and you have to understand this, because it's the thing that makes the next part possible. What he felt was not doubt. It was a kind of irritation, a specific irritation, the irritation of someone who has been challenged by someone they have already decided cannot challenge them. His brain had already filed Beverley into a category, and the category did not include majority investor. So what she had just said didn't land as information. It landed as a claim, and claims, Douglas felt, required verification, especially from certain kinds of people, especially when he was running low on patience before 9 in the morning. "That's quite a title," he said. And he smiled, not a warm smile. If there had been a vote in that room right then, silent, hands under the table, Douglas would have lost it by a margin, but nobody said anything. That's the thing about rooms like that. Everyone sees. Almost nobody speaks. "I'd like to see some identification," he said. "We take security seriously at this firm. I provided my credentials to your CFO's office when the meeting was confirmed, Beverley said. If there's been an administrative gap, I'd suggest we address it after the meeting begins. We're already 4 minutes behind schedule. Something shifted in his face. The irritation moved, became something harder. I don't know what you were told, he said, but I've been managing this portfolio for 6 years, and I think I would know if a 34% stakeholder was walking through that door this morning. I've never seen you before in my life. That's correct, Beverley said. We've never met. That doesn't change the ownership structure. I'd like you to step outside. I won't be doing that. He stared at her. She looked back at him with that stillness. If you've ever watched two people in a standoff, where one of them has all the power and the other one has all the confidence, you know that it's not always obvious, in the moment, which is which. Douglas turned to one of the junior analysts near the door. Call down to the front desk. Ask them to send someone up. The analyst, a young man who looked like he wanted to be elsewhere, specifically anywhere, picked up the phone. Beverley opened her folder again. While we wait, she said, I'd like to note for the record that we're now 6 minutes behind the scheduled start time. And this is the part where Douglas made it worse, because he could have stopped at any point before this. He could have pulled out his phone and called his CFO directly. He could have asked to see Beverley's business card and made a quiet call. He could have said, let's table this for 5 minutes and verify. Any of those things would have cost him embarrassment. None of them would have cost him what he was about to pay. Instead, he leaned on the table with both hands and said, loudly enough that it carried to the end of the room, loudly enough that the note-taking assistant stopped writing, he said, I have been with this firm for 21 years. I have managed hundreds of millions of dollars in this portfolio, and I think I would know if some woman walked in off the street and claimed to own a third of it. Some woman off the street. The young analyst on the phone stopped mid-dials. A woman named Pauline, who had known Douglas for 12 years and would later say she was not entirely surprised, looked at the window. Beverley did not change her expression. Not by a degree. 21 years, she said. That's a long time. Long enough to know that ownership records are public information and that your CFO's office received our confirmation of attendance via registered email on the 4th of March. She reached into her tote bag, the library tote bag, the one Douglas had clocked when she walked in and filed under things that confirmed what he already believed, and she set a printed document on the table. That's a summary of our current position. Page 3 has the stake breakdown. Page 7 has the authorization from your CFO. I've also forwarded it to 3 members of your board this morning as a matter of due diligence, because I had a feeling there might be friction. The room was very quiet. Douglas looked at the document. He didn't pick it up. Anyone can print a document, he said. And there it was. That was the moment. Because up until that point, you could have argued, and some people, later, did try to argue, that Douglas was being thorough, that he was being careful, that he couldn't be expected to take every claim at face value in a high-security financial environment. But when Beverley put that document on the table, something became clear to everyone in that room. Not just the junior analysts, not just the note-taker and Pauline and Douglas's other colleague, whose name was Martin, and who had been staring at his phone for the last 3 minutes. It became clear to the senior associate at the far end of the table, who would later tell the firm's HR director what she had witnessed. It became clear to the 2 assistants near the door, who were supposed to have left 10 minutes ago but hadn't. Douglas Farquhar was not being careful. Douglas Farquhar had decided something the moment he walked into this room, and no document, no credential, no explanation was going to change what he had already decided. Not because of anything Beverley had said or failed to say. Not because of anything that had happened, but because of what she looked like, because of who he had already decided she was before she opened her mouth. And everyone in that room knew it. And nobody said a word, which is something worth sitting with. Before we go on, and things do go on from here, and they go hard, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where someone was being treated like this? Maybe it was you. Maybe it was someone you were standing next to, and you saw it clearly. And you didn't say anything. Not because you didn't know what was right, but because the cost felt too high. The moment felt too charged. The risk felt too personal. That's a question this story is going to come back to. Keep it in mind. The door opened. Not security. Not the front desk. Halloran and Vesper's chief financial officer was a man named Terence Gilboa, 60 years old, gray-haired, who had been with the firm for 14 years, and who received a forwarded email from Beverley Okonkwo-Mills at 8:47 that morning that said, simply, "Arriving for the Alderton review. Please, ensure the room is briefed on our attendance. I anticipate some confusion." Terence walked in, saw Beverley, walked directly to her, and shook her hand with both of his. "Mrs. Okonkwo-Mills, I'm sorry I wasn't here when you arrived. We had a situation on 11 that ran long." He turned and looked at the room, at Douglas. Douglas was still standing with his hands on the table. "Douglas," Terence said, "you've met Miss Okonkwo-Mills, I take it?" A silence. "Beverley Okonkwo-Mills," Terence continued, in the tone of a man who is choosing his words for a reason, "is the managing partner of Okonkwo Capital, which holds a 34.2% interest in the Alderton Fund, making her not only a significant stakeholder in today's review, but, as of the restructuring approved by the board last November, a non-executive member of the Portfolio Oversight Committee." He paused. "She has a standing invitation to any and all Alderton review meetings. This has been in the shareholder documentation since the fourth quarter of last year." Douglas Farquhar said nothing. "I wasn't aware," he started. "The documentation was circulated to all senior staff in November," Terence said, quietly, carefully, and again in February. Douglas still sitting on the table in front of him. The one he had not picked up. And here is what he did not say. He did not say, "I apologize." He did not say, "Miss Okonkwo-Mills, I was completely out of line." He did not say any of the things that, had he said them, might have mattered in the weeks that followed. What he said was, "I was acting on what I knew." Beverley looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said. And she opened her folder, and she turned to the first page of the review, and she began the meeting. What happened afterward happened the way these things do, not with drama, but with paperwork. Terence Gilboa reported the incident to the firm's managing board that afternoon. He did not editorialize. He presented what he had witnessed, what the two assistants had witnessed, what Martin and Pauline and the senior associate and the young analyst had witnessed. The note-taker's minutes from before the meeting formally began were reviewed. 3 members of the board reached out to Beverley directly that evening. She responded to each of them briefly, professionally, and without embellishment. An independent HR review was initiated the following week. Beverley participated by written statement. She did not attend in person. She had other meetings. Douglas Farquhar was placed on administrative leave, pending the review on the 14th of March. On the 28th, his employment with Halloran and Vesper Capital was terminated. The official language was, "Conduct unbecoming of a senior representative and breach of fiduciary responsibility to a major stakeholder." His cufflinks and the photo of the premier stayed in the office while he cleared out his personal items, and he was escorted to the elevator by someone from building management, which is its own kind of symmetry. The Alderton quarterly review, for what it's worth, went well. Beverley flagged 2 underperforming assets in the third segment of the portfolio, proposed a rebalancing strategy that 3 of the other analysts later said they had been thinking about for months, but hadn't raised, and finished 7 minutes ahead of schedule. She was back at Pearson Airport by 5. Because the story of Douglas losing his job, that's not really the story. That's the last page. The story is everything that happened before Terence walked through that door. The 20-some minutes in that room, where 9 people watched Douglas Farquhar decide, in real time, that a document was not a document, and a credential was not a credential, and a woman was not who she said she was, because he had already made up his mind about who she was the moment he saw her. 9 people in that room. One of them spoke up, and it was the woman he was trying to remove from the table. The young analyst who had picked up the phone eventually called Beverley's office in Toronto 4 months later. He was looking for a position. He had left Halloran and Vesper in April. Not because anyone told him to, but because he said he couldn't walk past that boardroom anymore. Beverley's assistant scheduled a call. The call went well. He now works at Okonkwo Capital. He has been there for 7 months. By all accounts, he is doing excellent work. Beverley does not talk about the March incident publicly. She has given no interviews about it. When a journalist from a financial trade publication contacted her for comment following Douglas's termination, because these things do get out, they always do, she replied with a single sentence through her communications director. "We are glad the matter was handled appropriately and look forward to a continued strong relationship with Halloran and Vesper." The library tote bag, someone on the internet pointed out when the story began circulating, is from the Brampton Public Library. Beverley's home branch growing up. She still uses it. Some people carry their history like a burden. Beverley Okonkwo-Mills carried hers like a library card. Proof of membership, record of what she'd read, quiet evidence of everywhere she'd already been. And she never had to raise her voice once. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever sat at a table where someone looked right through you, drop a comment below. Tell us where you were watching from. And if you believe that the ones who stay calm in those rooms are the ones writing history from the outside, like this video and share it. Someone in your life needs to hear this today. We'll see you in the next one.